My name is Anna, and I've been a nurse for 20 years. In 2 decades on duty in a public hospital, I've seen it all. I've seen life begin, in complicated births in the middle of the night. I've seen life end, holding the hand of a patient who had no one else. I've dealt with gunshot wounds, with car accidents, with diseases I could barely pronounce the names of. I thought I had developed a thick skin, that nothing could shock or surprise me anymore. I was wrong. Nothing, absolutely nothing in my career prepared me for what I found in the home of the Montero family. I was hired to take care of a headache, and I ended up becoming the guardian of a secret worth billions of dollars. It all started 3 years ago. I was exhausted, tired of the hospital rush, the 24-hour shifts, the salary that barely paid the bills. I wanted a change. I wanted something calmer, more predictable. That's when I saw the ad at a luxury recruitment agency, one that specialized in placing healthcare professionals in high-end residences. The job description was vague and, at the same time, very specific. Seeking private nurse for continuous care of a female patient with chronic migraines and severe photophobia. Patient requires an environment of total tranquility and rest. Absolute discretion and signing of a non-disclosure agreement required. Must be willing to live on site. Salary is not an issue. Salary is not an issue. That phrase jumped off the page. For me, salary had always been an issue. I sent my resume without much hope. To my surprise, they called me the next day. The interview wasn't in an office or a hospital. It was in the lobby of a 5-star hotel, and it wasn't with a doctor or an HR manager. It was with the patient's husband, Mr. Edward Montero. I knew him from magazine covers. One of the richest men in the country, the genius behind a pharmaceutical empire. His company was famous for its innovative drugs, especially one, an almost miraculous medicine that they said was the biggest revolution in cancer prevention and treatment in decades. He was charismatic, charming, and greeted me with a firm handshake and a worried smile. "Anna, thank you for coming," he said, his voice calm and controlled. "I'll be direct. My wife, Letitia, suffers from a very debilitating condition. They're terrible migraines that leave her bedridden for days. The light, the sound, everything becomes torture for her. This, as you can imagine, leads to terrible anxiety and panic attacks." He looked the picture of a dedicated and distressed husband. "We've tried everything, the best doctors, the best treatments, but her condition is chronic. What we can do is manage the pain and give her the best quality of life possible. And for that, I need the best nurse by her side, 24 hours a day." He explained the job. I would be responsible for administering medication, prescribed by the family doctor, one of the most renowned neurologists in the country. My job would be to keep the house's environment calm, monitor her vital signs during crises, and above all, ensure her privacy. "The press would be cruel to Letitia, Anna," he said with a serious look. "They wouldn't understand her fragility. They'd paint a sensationalist picture. That's why her seclusion is our top priority. No one can know the severity of her condition." The story made sense. It was sad, but plausible. And then, he mentioned the salary. The number was so high I was sure I had misheard. It was 5 times what I made at the hospital. It was a life-changing salary. I accepted. What nurse wouldn't? 2 weeks later, after a background check that must have investigated me back to my great-grandparents, I was at the door of the Montero mansion with my bags packed. It was a fortress of concrete and glass, hidden on top of a hill, surrounded by high walls and security cameras. It wasn't a welcoming house. It was a defensive one. I was greeted by a housekeeper, who showed me to my room, a suite that was larger and more luxurious than my entire apartment, and then took me to meet my patient. Letitia Montero was sitting in an armchair, in a living room with the heavy curtains almost closed, letting in only a soft, indirect light. She was incredibly beautiful, like one of those 1950s movie stars, but it was a fragile beauty. She was pale, thin, and there was a deep sadness in her eyes, which seemed too large for her delicate face. She gave me a faint smile. "Welcome, Anna. I hope I won't be too much trouble." Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Edward was right. She looked like a porcelain doll, someone who needed care and protection. My first few days were quiet. I familiarized myself with the house's routine, which was as silent as a convent. I learned Letitia's medication protocol, organized on a spreadsheet by her doctor. It was a combination of potent analgesics, beta blockers for the migraine, and a considerable dose of an anxiolytic for the anxiety attacks. Everything seemed to fit the diagnosis Edward had given me. Letitia spent most of her time in her room, or in that dark living room, reading or listening to classical music at a low volume. She spoke little. She seemed to live in her own world, a world of headaches and melancholy. The first crisis happened at the end of my first week. I was in the residential wing's kitchenette when I heard a noise from her room, the sound of a glass breaking. I ran there. She was standing in the middle of the room, trembling, her eyes wide with panic. The light, she stammered, pointing at the window, even though the curtains were closed. It's burning me! Make it stop! She was sweating, her breathing shallow and fast. She started pacing back and forth, agitated, her hands on her head. I can't think. The noise. Make the noise stop. I approached her calmly, using my most professional and reassuring voice. Letitia, it's okay. It's me, Anna. There's no noise. There's no bright light. You're safe. But she didn't hear me. She seemed to be in another reality, a reality of pure pain and panic. I guided her to the bed. The symptoms were extreme, more intense than any migraine attack I had ever seen. But the doctor's protocol for these situations was clear. I grabbed the emergency kit. I prepared the injection exactly as instructed, a dose of a powerful sedative. This will help you relax, Letitia. The pain will go away, I said, as I administered the shot in her arm. And it did. Within minutes, her agitation subsided. The trembling stopped. Her eyes lost focus, and she sank into the pillows, falling into a heavy, almost unnatural sleep. I stood there, beside the bed, monitoring her vitals, which slowly returned to normal. I took a deep breath, my heart still racing a bit from the adrenaline. The protocol had worked. As I watched her sleep, so pale and still she looked like a wax statue, I reflected on my new job. It was a strange clinical picture, yes. The symptoms were a bit atypical. The intensity of the crisis seemed disproportionate, but I was a nurse, not her doctor. My job was to follow the protocol, to alleviate my patient's suffering. I thought I understood my role in that house. I was there to manage the pain of a rich, fragile woman, to be the guardian of her illness. Little did I know, in that first week, that her pain wasn't the disease. Her pain was the treatment. The crisis passed, and the routine set in, and what a strange routine it was. My life came to be governed by Letitia's medication clock, a cocktail of pills in the morning, so she would wake up without pain, a dose of a mood stabilizer at lunchtime, to prevent anxiety, and a stronger sedative at night, to ensure a restful sleep. It was a chemical cycle, perfectly orchestrated by the renowned Dr. Martins, the family doctor, with whom I only spoke by phone, and who always seemed to be in a hurry. I became Letitia's shadow, and she, mine. We lived in an isolated wing of the mansion, a world apart from Mr. Edward's business empire. He, in turn, was an almost ghostly presence. He would leave before I woke up, and return long after Letitia was already sedated for the night. I would see him sometimes, for an hour or two on the rare days he worked from home. He was always impeccably polite, asking me if I needed anything, if the situation was stable. He always used that word, situation, as if his wife were a variable in a business equation. Letitia's isolation was absolute. No friends visited her. Her family, her parents, called once a week at a scheduled time, and the conversation was always short, superficial. "Are you feeling better, dear?" "Yes, Mom, I'm fine." "Oh, good. Keep taking care of yourself." The end. I realized that everyone around her had accepted the narrative that she was a fragile, sick woman who needed to be left alone. No one questioned. No one dug deeper. My most challenging job wasn't managing the crises. It was preparing her for her rare public appearances. Once a month or so, there was a charity dinner, a gala, or an important company event where the presence of Mrs. Montero was mandatory. And those days were a production spectacle, a war room operation. It began 48 hours in advance. Dr. Martins would give me a special medication protocol over the phone, an adjustment for the event. The goal was clear: to have Letitia lucid, smiling, and charming for a precise period of 3 to 4 hours. No more, no less. On the day of the event, it was like preparing an actress for the role of her life. A hairstylist and makeup artist would come to the house, and while they worked, I stood by, monitoring. The makeup artist had a difficult task, using his tricks to hide the pallor of her skin, the dullness in her eyes, and an almost imperceptible tremor that sometimes appeared in her left hand. It's a side effect of the stronger analgesics, Dr. Martins had once explained to me. Try to keep her hands busy, holding a glass, a clutch. The most surreal part was my training with her. An hour before leaving, I would sit with Letitia and go over the script for the evening. Her husband, Edward, would give me a list with the names and faces of the most important guests she needed to interact with. "Remember, Letitia," I'd say, showing her a picture of a white-haired man on my tablet. "This is the senator. Smile. Ask about his grandchildren. Their names are Lucas and Gabriel." "Lucas and Gabriel," she would repeat, her voice a bit slurred from the medication. "This is the Swiss ambassador. Compliment her brooch. And don't talk about politics," I would instruct. It was stagecraft. I was building a character, and most of the time it worked. She would leave the room, beautiful in her designer dress, smile for the photos next to her powerful husband, exchange 2 or 3 rehearsed sentences with the right people, and then come home, exhausted, ready for her dose of sedative and oblivion. It was during one of these training sessions that the first real seed of doubt was planted in my mind. We were going over the list for a dinner at their house. I was showing the photos. She was repeating the names. Everything was going fine. Then, I showed her the photo of the new CEO of the company's Japanese branch. "This is Mr. Tanaka. Edward said it's very important that you greet him in Japanese. Say, konbanwa, Tanaka-san," I instructed. She looked at me. There was an expression of genuine confusion on her face, a confusion I had never seen before. It wasn't the fog of the drugs. It was a blank. What is this?" she asked, pointing with a trembling hand to the fork next to the plate of untouched salad in front of her. I froze. That's a fork, Letitia. Fork," she repeated, as if she were learning the word for the first time. She looked at the object, then at her own hand, as if she didn't know how to connect the two. The moment lasted maybe 3-4 seconds, and then she blinked, as if coming out of a trance. "Oh, of course, the fork. How silly of me. I'm a little tired today," and she went back to memorizing Mr. Tanaka's name. But I didn't forget. That wasn't a common memory lapse. It wasn't forgetting a name. It was forgetting an object, a function, something fundamental. At the time, I did what my trained mind did. I rationalized. "It's the medication," I told myself. "A cocktail of drugs this strong can cause mental confusion, disorientation. It's the only explanation that makes sense." I clung to that explanation, because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. My belief in story A, that of addiction and mental instability, became almost a certainty a few weeks later. It was late at night, almost 2 a.m. I was in my room, reading, when I heard a noise in the residential wing. I went to check. The light in Letitia's room was on. The door was ajar. I peeked in. She wasn't having a crisis. She was awake, in her nightgown, frantically rummaging through the drawers of her vanity, the closets in her dressing room. She was looking for something, with the desperation of someone who has lost the most important thing in the world. I entered slowly. "Letitia, what's wrong? Do you need something?" She turned to me, and her gaze was one of pure pleading, a look I had seen before, many times, in the hospital corridors. "Anna, please," she whispered, coming closer, her cold hands gripping my arm. "My medicine, the one for the pain, the stronger one. Dr. Martin said you could only give it to me every 8 hours, but I need it now. Please, the pain is coming back. I can't take it. Just a little." It was the classic request, the bargaining, the plea of an addict. My heart filled with immense pity. She was a prisoner, indeed. "I can't, Letitia," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "I have to follow the doctor's orders. Your next dose isn't until 6 a.m. Try to take a deep breath. I'll get you some chamomile tea." She started to cry, a low, desperate sob. "You don't understand. You don't understand." But I thought I did. In that moment, all the pieces fell into place in my head in a logical and tragic way. The migraine attacks, the anxiety, the need for seclusion, the mental confusion, and now, the plea for more drugs. I went back to my room, leaving her crying in silence, and I was absolutely certain of my private diagnosis. The whole story made sense. My patient wasn't just a sick woman suffering from migraines. She was an addict, a prisoner of her own dependency, protected and hidden by her husband's power and money. And my job, I finally understood with a depressing clarity, wasn't that of a healing nurse. It was that of a jailer who controls access to the drug. With my new and sad certainty, My way of working changed. I became more efficient, more distant. I started to see Letitia not as my employer, but as a chronic patient with a condition I knew well, addiction. I maintained the medication routine with military precision, not out of care, but out of control, and partly out of pity. I saw her as a victim, not just of addiction, but of that husband who preferred to keep her in a chemical fog rather than deal with a scandal. Life went on in this rhythm for months. It was a macabre and silent dance. I would prepare Letitia for her events. She would act her part, come home exhausted, and I would put her to sleep with a sedative. Edward Montero would greet me in the hallways with that polished smile of his, thanking me for my excellent work in keeping the situation stable. The situation. I hated that word. I became an expert at hiding the signs. I learned to use a specific type of concealer to hide her deep, dark circles. I learned to style her hair in a way that hid a small patch of thinning that had started to appear near her temple. I learned to identify the triggers that made her more anxious and to preemptively medicate her before a crisis could begin. I was good at my job, too good, and it filled me with shame. The crack in my theory, in my story A, appeared on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Like every month, the shipment of medications arrived from the elite compounding pharmacy that served the family. There were boxes and boxes of drugs, all with Letitia's name on them, prescribed by Dr. Martins. My job was to check everything, organize it, and store it in the locked medicine cabinet. I was doing just that, checking the names and dosages against the prescription list. Anxiolytics, check. Opioid analgesics, check. Beta blockers, check. And then, I saw a vial I had never seen before. It wasn't a commercial drug. The label was different. White, with black letters, in a format I knew well from my hospital days. It was the label of a clinical trial medication. Instead of a brand name, there was a code, RTX-74B, and below it, the words, "For research use only. Store at low temperature." I felt an immediate chill. A professional alarm went off in my head. A clinical trial? Why on earth would Letitia be taking an experimental drug? Her diagnosis was migraine and anxiety. These are conditions treated with an arsenal of well-known and approved drugs. Participating in a clinical study, especially for a drug with a code like that, which indicated something new, was a complex procedure. It would require the patient's informed consent, rigorous monitoring by an ethics committee, and I, as the administering nurse, would have to have been informed of every detail. I picked up the vial. The liquid inside was clear, colorless. It looked like water, but I knew that the most potent things in the world often look like water. My protocol was clear. I could not administer a medication that was not on the official prescription and that I was not familiar with, and that code, RTX-74B, was nowhere on her charts. I picked up my phone and called Dr. Martins. He answered, his voice hurried as always. "Dr. Martins, this is Anna, Mrs. Montero's nurse. I'm checking the new medication shipment and there's a vial here I don't recognize." "Ah, yes," he said without hesitation. "The RTX." Mr. Montero was already aware of the delivery. "Yes, but what is it?" I insisted. "It's a clinical trial medication. It's not in her protocol. What's the indication?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. A short pause, but it felt like an eternity. "Look, Anna," he said, his tone now losing its cordiality and becoming cold, almost irritated. "It's a new compound, an analog of one of her previous medications, with a lower side effect profile. It's more effective for the refractory migraines she presents. Just follow the instruction on the box. Replace the old analgesic with this one, at the same dosage." I couldn't believe it. His response was a violation of every medical procedure I knew. "But doctor," I continued, "is Mrs. Montero formally participating in a study? Because if she is, I need access to the documents, the consent form, the possible adverse effects. I can't administer an experimental drug blind. It's against my code of ethics." His voice turned as hard as steel. "Nurse Anna, you are an excellent professional, and I understand your zeal. But your role, in this case, is to administer the medication that I, as the physician in charge, prescribe. The particulars of the treatment are my responsibility and the family's. Mr. Montero is aware of and approves every step. Do not worry about it. Just do your job." And before I could say anything else, he hung up. I stood there holding my phone, looking at the vial in my other hand. The conversation had not reassured me. It had done the opposite. It had confirmed that there was something very, very wrong here. A doctor would never, in his right mind, be so vague and dismissive about an experimental drug. He was hiding something. The family was hiding something. My theory of drug addiction, which had seemed so solid, now had a flaw, a huge flaw. Addicts don't receive cutting-edge experimental drugs. They get methadone, therapy, detox treatments, not a vial with a code that looked like it came from a science fiction lab. I was facing a professional and moral dilemma. I couldn't administer that drug, but if I refused, I would be fired, and maybe sued for breach of contract. I needed to know what it was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I waited for the whole house to quiet down. I went to my room and got an old laptop, one I barely used just to make sure it wasn't being monitored. I used a neighbor's Wi-Fi network, which I could pick up from my window. I entered a restricted access portal for healthcare professionals, a global database of medical research and clinical trials. It was a long shot. Most of these studies are confidential, but I had to try. In the search bar, I typed the code, RTX74B, and I pressed enter. For a second, nothing happened. And then, a single result appeared on the screen. A single link. My heart raced. I clicked. The page that opened was for a clinical trial, Phase 2, sponsored and conducted by Mr. Edward Montero's own pharmaceutical company. My jaw dropped. He was testing a drug from his own company on his wife? I read the title of the study, and the words seemed to blur in front of me. I read it again and again to make sure I was understanding, and every word was a hammer shattering the reality I thought I knew. The study had absolutely nothing to do with migraines, or anxiety, or drug addiction. The research title was clear, technical, and terrifying. It was Experimental Cell Therapy for the Inhibition of Metastases in Squamous Cell Carcinomas. Carcinoma. The word flashed in my mind, the word that everyone, rich or poor, fears more than any other. Cancer. I closed the laptop with a dull thud, my heart pounding in my chest. Carcinoma. Cancer. The word echoed in my head, realigning every fact, every symptom, every lie they had told me over the last few months. Suddenly, everything made a horrible and perfect kind of sense. Letitia's constant fatigue, her pallor, the weight loss I had attributed to anxiety, the tremor in her left hand, that bizarre episode of confusion with the fork. It wasn't drug fog, it was a neurological symptom. And the pain, the searing pain she described as a migraine, was probably the pain of a growing tumor or of metastases spreading. I felt a wave of nausea, not just from the horror of the disease, but from my own stupidity, from my professional arrogance. I, the experienced nurse, had judged my patient. I had labeled her as an addict, a weak woman, and all this time, she was a victim of a terrible disease, and of something much, much worse. My first emotion was overwhelming empathy. Poor thing. That fragile, lonely woman was facing the end of her life, and her own family was treating her like she was crazy. But the empathy quickly gave way to a question that burned in my mind. Why? Why the charade? Why hide a cancer diagnosis? In the world we live in, unfortunately, the disease is common. People get support, treatment, compassion. Why construct such an elaborate, cruel lie to disguise the truth? What was the secret that was worth treating your own wife like a mental prisoner? My job changed again. I was no longer the jailer of an addict. I was a detective, and my crime scene was that silent mansion. I started paying attention to everything with new eyes. The first thing I did was re-examine the medication list. Now, with the word cancer in my head, the drug cocktail made a completely different and much more sinister kind of sense. The opioid analgesic wasn't for migraines, it was for severe oncological pain. The anxiolytic was actually a potent antiemetic used to control the violent nausea caused by chemotherapy. And the new experimental drug, RTX74B, it was the chemotherapy itself, an experimental therapy they were testing on her, in secret. I was, unknowingly, administering a clandestine cancer treatment. The need to find proof, to understand the full plan, became an obsession. I knew the answers would be in the one place in the house that was forbidden territory for me, Edward Montero's private office. I waited for my opportunity, and it came a week later. Edward announced at breakfast that he would be taking a 2-day trip to Asia for a meeting with investors. That would be my window. The night he left, I waited for the whole house to fall into silence. I gave Letitia her nightly sedative, and once I was sure she was in a deep sleep, I went. His office was like the rest of the house. Large, cold, impersonal, and impeccably tidy. It looked like a CEO's office, not a personal space. I started searching. Drawers, cabinets, nothing. Just contracts, market reports, business papers. Then I saw it. Hidden behind a large abstract art painting on the wall was a safe, a biometric safe, which required a fingerprint. A dead end. I felt like an idiot. Of course, his secrets would be locked away. I was about to give up when I remembered something Letitia had told me. In one of her rare moments of lucidity, we were talking about passwords, and she laughed faintly and said, "Edward is so predictable. He uses our wedding anniversary for everything." It was a long shot. But next to the fingerprint reader, there was a small numeric keypad for a backup code. With my heart in my throat, I typed the numbers, the day, the month, and the year they were married. The panel light turned green. The safe door opened with a soft click. Inside, there was no cash or jewelry. There were only folders, and one of them was labeled LM, Personal, Letitia Montero. I took the folder. My hands were shaking so much I could barely open it. Inside was Letitia's complete and true medical history, blood tests, biopsies, CT scans, and the diagnosis clear as day, dated almost 2 years ago. Stage 4 carcinoma. The prognosis was brutal. No hope of a cure. Only palliative treatment to extend her life by another year or two. Next to her medical files was another folder. This one had the label of one of the world's largest investment banks. And the title was Merger Project, Montero Pharma and Horizon Global. I started to read. It was the proposal for the merger of Edward's company with an Asian conglomerate. A deal that would create one of the largest pharmaceutical companies on the planet. A deal worth billions and billions of dollars. I flipped through the pages of the preliminary contract, the legal and financial jargon giving me a headache. And then, I found it. A clause. Small, but explosive. The material adverse clause. It stated that the deal could be nullified if any adverse information about the health and stability of key executives and their immediate families was revealed before the deal's conclusion. A terminal illness in the CEO's family. That would be an earthquake. It would affect investor confidence, crash the stock price. It would ruin the deal. And to make matters worse, in the marketing section, there was the crown jewel of the Montero Company, its miracle cancer drug, the product that accounted for 60% of the company's revenue. In that moment, in the silence of that office, the whole truth hit me like a runaway train. The hypocrisy, the monstrosity. Edward Montero wasn't hiding his wife's illness to protect her from the press. He was hiding her illness to protect his stock price. He couldn't let the world know that the wife of the man selling the cure for cancer was, herself, dying of cancer. It would be the living proof that his product, his empire, his entire life, was a fraud. Letitia wasn't a patient. She was a piece of evidence that needed to be hidden. The migraine treatment, the sedation, the isolation, it was all to prevent her from, in a moment of pain, delirium, or simple desperation, telling someone the truth. I was standing there, with the documents that could destroy an empire in my hands, when I heard a sound that chilled my soul. The sound of the mansion's front door opening. My blood ran cold. He wasn't in Asia. He had come back. In a panic, I threw the folders haphazardly back into the safe, closed the door, and ran out of the office. I didn't bother to lock the door. I just pulled it shut. I darted through the dark corridors, back to the bedroom wing. I got into my room, closed the door, and leaned against it, panting, my heart feeling like it was going to explode. I had made it. He hadn't seen me. And then, my cell phone, which was in my pocket, vibrated. I took the device out with a trembling hand. It was a message, from a number I didn't recognize. I opened the message. There was a photo, a grainy, black and white image. It was me, from behind, inside his office, holding the files. The photo had been taken by a hidden security camera in the corner of the room. Below the photo, a single line of text. "I think we need to talk about your non-disclosure agreement, Anna." The message on the phone was like a judge's sentence. A picture of me, inside the most forbidden place in the house, and a sentence that was both an invitation and a threat. "I think we need to talk about your non-disclosure agreement, Anna." There was nowhere to run. The house, which already felt like a prison, had now officially become my cell. He hadn't just come back. He had been watching me the whole time. The trip to Asia probably never existed. It was bait, and I had taken it. The fear I felt was unlike anything before. It was a cold, lucid fear. The fear of an animal that knows the predator is just outside its den. My phone vibrated again. The same black screen, the same unknown number. In the main living room, in 5 minutes. The order was clear. I had no choice. I took a deep breath, trying to control the shaking in my hands. I smoothed my nurse's uniform, a pathetic attempt to maintain professional composure, and I walked to my judgment. He was there, as I knew he would be, sitting in a dark leather armchair, facing the unlit fireplace, with a glass of whiskey in his hand. The room was in shadow, lit only by a lamp beside him. He seemed perfectly calm, as if he were waiting for a guest for a drink. "Good evening, Anna," he said, without turning to face me. "Care for a drink? I imagine it's been a long night for you." "I don't want a drink, Edward," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. "I want to know what you want." He took a sip of his whiskey and finally turned to face me. There was an amused smile on his lips. "What do I want? You're an intelligent woman, Anna. I think you already know, but I admire your initiative. Truly, the way you figured it all out was impressive. You're an excellent investigator. Perhaps you chose the wrong profession." I didn't take the bait. "She has cancer, Edward, and you're hiding it from the world, treating her like an addict, drugging her so she won't talk. All for a business deal. For money." "Money?" He laughed, a genuine laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. "Oh, Anna, you still think so small. It's not about the money. Money is just how you keep score. It's about the legacy. It's about the empire I built, an empire based on a promise that we can defeat humanity's greatest enemy. My company doesn't sell medicine. It sells hope. And the truth, the ugly, inconvenient truth about my wife's illness. The truth is bad for business. It destroys hope, and I cannot allow that." The coldness with which he spoke was inhuman. He wasn't defending himself. He was explaining himself, as if his logic were the only one possible. "So you keep her prisoner here, sedated, waiting for her to die in silence so your legacy won't be tarnished?" I accused, my anger finally overcoming my fear. "I am giving her the best care money can buy," he retorted, his tone now harder. "And I am protecting what we both built. Yes, both of us. You're a part of this now, Anna. The moment you signed that non-disclosure agreement, you joined the team. And now that you know the truth, you have a problem. And I, consequently, have one too." He stood up and walked slowly toward me. "And I need to solve my problem, Anna. I can't silence you in the traditional way. It would be risky. It would leave a trail. And I detest messes. But I can buy you. I can give you so much money that your guilty conscience will drown in champagne for the rest of your life." I stared at him, silently, waiting for the proposal. "I'm offering you a new contract," he said. "A permanent contract. You'll continue to be Letitia's nurse, but with a new title, Chief Medical Curator. Your salary will be 10 times what it is today. I'm going to create a charitable foundation in Letitia's name for rare disease research. And you, Anna, will be the chairwoman of that foundation's board. You'll have status, prestige, a public image as a philanthropist. You'll travel the world, give lectures." It was a diabolical offer. He wasn't just offering me money, he was offering me a new identity, an identity that would make me a public accomplice to his farce. If I accepted, how could I ever expose him? I would be the chairwoman of his foundation, the living proof of his goodness and concern. "You become part of the solution, not the problem," he concluded, the smile returning. "You become one of us, rich, powerful, and most importantly, safe." "And if I refuse?" I asked, the words scratching my throat. His smile vanished. He stepped closer until he was inches from me. His voice dropped to an icy whisper. "If you refuse, Anna, then you remain the problem, and I'll have no choice but to solve the problem, permanently. And believe me, I am very, very good at solving problems." The threat was no longer veiled. It was a promise. He stepped away and returned to his armchair. "You don't have to answer me now," he said, picking up his whiskey glass. "You have until dawn to think about my generous offer. Think about your future. Think about your life. Think about what's best for you. But think fast." He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. I turned and walked out of the room, my legs like jelly. He had backed me into a corner. A choice between becoming a rich and powerful monster or being erased from existence. As I climbed the stairs to my room, the image of Letitia, fragile and asleep in her bed, came to my mind, and the truth hit me with the force of a punch. The choice wasn't about my life, it was about hers. He would only let me live if I agreed to help keep his wife in her chemical prison, perhaps for the rest of her life. If I accepted, I would be condemning Letitia. If I refused, he would eliminate me, hire another nurse, and continue his plan just the same. My death or my complicity would change nothing about her fate. The only thing I could choose was my own end, and for the first time, the idea of fighting seemed completely futile. The game was rigged, and I had already lost. I was the nurse for the socialite's migraine. The truth was much worse. Narration script, part 6 of 6, finale. I spent the entire night awake, sitting in the armchair in my room, looking out at the illuminated city below. Edward's ultimatum echoed in my head. Join me or disappear, accomplice or corpse. The choice seemed binary, impossible, and above all, useless. My rebellion or my submission would not save Letitia. He would always win. But as the night wore on, another idea, a third way, began to form in my mind. An idea born of my despair, my anger, and, most importantly, my oath as a nurse. My duty was not to the man who paid me. It was to my patient. And if I couldn't save her, maybe I could honor her. I needed to understand the woman behind the illness, behind the sedation. I needed to know who the real Letitia was. With a renewed purpose, I went to her room. She was sleeping, her breath soft, under the effect of the night's sedative. Next to her bed was an elegant designer laptop. I had never touched it, but that night I picked it up. I didn't know the password, but I tried the obvious. Her date of birth. It opened. The desktop was almost empty. A few icons for art programs, an internet browser. But there was a folder, in a corner, with a strange name. Grandma's Recipes. My gut screamed. I clicked. The folder was full of files, and they weren't recipes. They were emails, conversation logs, and videos. Dozens of small videos. They were a diary. A video diary from Letitia herself, recorded over the last 2 years. I clicked on the first video. Letitia's face appeared on the screen. She looked healthier, but her eyes already showed a shadow of fear. Diary, day 1, she began, her voice trembling. I know. I found out. The diagnosis. The doctor told me the truth before Edward could silence him. And I know what he's going to do. He's not going to treat me. He's going to hide me. My heart stopped. I kept watching. Video after video, she told her story. The truth. She knew everything. About the cancer. About her husband's plan. About the drug fraud. The crises weren't just symptoms of the disease. They were acts of rebellion. They were her attempts to fight the sedation, to try to communicate, to try to ask for help. And most shocking of all, she was not a passive victim. She was fighting back. The emails in the folder showed that she had secretly contacted a group of investigative journalists. She had hired her own investigators. She was assembling a dossier to destroy her husband, but he discovered her plan first. And my hiring, my sedation regimen, was his response to silence her rebellion once and for all. And then, I found the last video, recorded just a few weeks before I arrived. Her eyes were sunken, her voice weak, but filled with a steely determination. He's winning, she said to the camera. He's going to lock me inside my own mind. But I have one last plan. An insurance policy. I've gathered all the evidence, all the documents, into a single encrypted file. And I've sent it to one person. The only person in the world who hates him as much as I do. The only one who would have the courage to use it. I gave her a switch, an activation code. If all else fails, she has my permission to burn his empire to the ground. She paused, took a deep breath. Her name is Laura, his first wife. I froze. Laura, the ex-wife. The woman whose silence he had bought 20 years ago. Letitia had found her, and had given her the final weapon. I had my answer, my third way. I didn't have to be an accomplice, and I didn't have to die. I needed to be the nurse that my patient, the real Letitia, wanted me to be. Dawn was breaking. The hour of my decision. I left Letitia's room and went to the living room, where Edward was waiting for me. He was sitting in the same armchair, the same glass of whiskey in his hand. So, he asked, "What's it going to be, Anna? The foundation board or oblivion?" I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see an all-powerful monster. I saw a terrified man, hiding behind a wall of money. "Neither," I answered. I took out my cell phone and dialed a number I had found in Letitia's files, a number for a Swiss phone. The call was answered on the first ring. A woman's voice, middle-aged, strong and clear, said, "Hello? Laura?" I asked. There was a silence on the other end. Edward stood up, his face a mask of fury and confusion. "Who's speaking?" the voice asked. "My name is Anna. I'm Letitia's nurse," I said, looking directly into Edward's eyes. "She asked me to give you a message. She said the confession protocol is activated, and the code is justice for David." I hung up the phone. Edward's face went white. He understood. He understood that the game was no longer between him and me. It was between him and all the ghosts he had created. My work there was done. I don't know what happened next. I turned and walked out of that house, under the first ray of morning sun. I took nothing with me, just the secret I was paid to keep, and which, in the end, I helped to set free. I don't know what happened to Edward's empire, or to Laura's revenge, and I don't know what happened to Letitia, but sometimes, at night, I think of her, and I like to believe that, wherever she is, she has finally found peace, because in the end, I wasn't the hero of her story, nor the villain. I was just the nurse who, in the final moment, had the honor of administering the final dose, not of a sedative, the dose of truth.